His first debate performance will have the latest reporting on his campaign and on new poll numbers. Biden policies pay off at the border. Camila Montoya Galvez has the latest on migrant crossings. And it is the summer of political power swerves. In France, the far right does even better than expected. Plus, the case charging Boeing for the deaths in 2 Supermax jet crashes comes to a head. Hurricane Beryl barrels on, and Simone Biles is headed back to the Olympics. And finally, the Rubik's Cube is 50 years old, just about the amount of time it took me to solve it. The Daily Report starts in a moment. Hello, thank you for joining us. We begin our report with one of the most historic rulings on the presidency since the powers for the office were first drawn up in the summertime 234 years ago. In a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court's conservative justices ruled Donald Trump is entitled to absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for, quote, official acts taken during his tenure in office. But the former president and all former presidents are not immune from prosecution for unofficial acts. It's a ruling that affirms a claim that was considered outrageous when Richard Nixon made it 45 years ago. In an interview after he left office, Nixon was asked about a proposal from his aides to spy on Americans.
Well, when the president does it, that means that it is not illegal.
The 3 liberal justices on the court dissented. Justice Sotomayor wrote, quote, today's decision to grant former presidents criminal immunity reshapes the institution of the presidency. It makes a mockery of the principle foundational to our constitutional and system of government, that no man is above the law. The case stems from an August 2023 federal indictment charging Trump for actions surrounding January 6th. He's facing 4 counts, including conspiracy to defraud the United States and obstruction of an official proceeding. The ruling puts the future of that case into question. CBS News campaign reporter and attorney Katrina Kaufman joins me now. Katrina, what does the ruling mean for that case, Jack Smith's case against Trump?
This ruling is not great for Jack Smith's case against Donald Trump and for its timeline. What's going to have to happen next is that it's going to be remanded to the lower courts, or a number of issues related to the conduct of this indictment, because Judge Tanya Chutkan is now going to have to determine what is official and what is unofficial, what can remain in this indictment by Jack Smith against Donald Trump. For example, Trump's conduct related to the Department of Justice, the Supreme Court has said is official, so he is immune from that. That can no longer be a part of this indictment. Trump's effort to pressure Vice President Mike Pence to interfere with the count of the electoral vote, the court said that that is presumptively immune. So that means that it will be the government's burden to show that that was an unofficial act. The same with the effort to create fake electors that's alleged in the indictment. There's going to have to be further fact-finding on that to determine if that is an unofficial act that can be prosecuted in this case. And further complicating things is that the Supreme Court says that motive cannot be taken into account when this is being distinguished, whether something is official or unofficial. So you can't look at Trump's intent when he took these actions. Another thing that they said that I think is very important to highlight in this decision is that official acts can't even be part of the evidence that's presented in this trial. So this also could limit the story that Jack Smith is able to present to a jury when this case finally moves forward at a trial, which is very unlikely to take place before the November election at this point.
That's thank you. That's very detailed and extremely helpful. Let me ask you very quickly, the Georgia case, how does this affect that?
So for Georgia, something similar will have to be done, where they look at the conduct in this indictment and they determine what is official and what is unofficial, what can move forward as part of this trial.
Katrina Kaufman, thank you so much.
Thank you, John.
CBS News legal analyst and Loyola Law School professor Jessica Levinson joins me now. Jessica, what presidential role was the majority in the Supreme Court trying to protect here with this ruling?
I think the president's ability to act without fear that based on every turnaround, every corner, there might be a state or federal prosecutor saying, here is your indictment. I think it's a great question because it really shows the difference between what the majority and the dissent were worried about here. We have the majority who's very worried about protecting the office of the presidency and protecting presidents in their ability to function, and again, not being subject to criminal cases that might be filed based on political motives, for instance. And then we have a dissent worried about very different things, worried about the ability of the criminal justice system to function, worried about the idea that we are elevating one person, the president, above the rest of us in society. I think the difference is really different lenses by which you view this constitutional question, but also different fears that you have going into this question.
The history of the modern presidency has been that it has ballooned since the original conception by the founders with the Depression, the Second World War, the Cold War, the imperial presidency being a new term that we all now use. Given that and the outline that Katrina gave us in terms of what's in this ruling, who determines? I mean, it feels like everything could be considered an official act, and therefore, how does it get decided what's official and unofficial? And is there very much ground on which you could have an unofficial act unless it was just completely a million miles away from the office of the presidency?
I mean, maybe 800,000 miles away, but it's going to be pretty far away in the sense that, again, it's an important question, right? Because it's highlighting the idea that when presidents act, it oftentimes looks official. And the court really creates these three buckets, as you were talking about. So there's absolute immunity for the things that only the president can do: pardon somebody, appoint an ambassador, or, hire and fire an attorney general, for instance. And then there's this outer ambit, this next concentric circle, which is a pretty big circle. And this talks about official acts, the type of thing that a president does in his capacity as president. This isn't Donald Trump doing something, it's President Trump or President X doing something. And then we have presumed immunity. Now, then there's this other bucket, and I think your question gets exactly to, how do we determine the difference between unofficial acts, private acts, and those official acts? And this goes back to Judge Chutkan. And if there are future cases, it goes back to the trial court judge to sift through the allegations and try and make that very difficult determination.
So two more questions, one very quick, which is, once they make a determination, isn't it likely then it'll bounce back up to the Supreme Court because somebody will say, well, they cut the bologna too thin here?
So I don't know if it goes back up to the Supreme Court, if they're going to take it, but it bounces back. You're right.
Finally, the question on the Chevron deference. This ruling last week by the Supreme Court that gave power from the executive back to Congress. Give me your sense of how the court, the majority, sees these two different things as they basically rejigger the power balance in the shared power system.
I love this question because it is about rejiggering power. And so when it comes to that big Chevron case, the question was, you have a congressional statute. It's ambiguous. Now, the executive agency that is enforcing and administering that statute, if they give a reasonable interpretation, do federal judges defer to it? And the answer now is no, they don't. They make an independent assessment. So I would say I absolutely agree that it's rejiggered power away from executive agencies to Congress, but also to federal judges. This gives a lot more power to federal judges to say, I'm not so sure about that. So it's putting more pressure on Congress. And this is a theme from this court, right? Congress, do your job.
Right. Well, we'll see if they can get them to do it where others have failed. Jessica Levinson, thank you so much, as always.
Thank you.
Longtime Trump ally Steve Bannon has surrendered to federal prison. A former White House aide arrived at a correctional facility in Western Connecticut on Monday. Bannon was sentenced to 4 months in prison for defying a congressional subpoena related to the House January 6th investigation. He is appealing the conviction before the Supreme Court, but the justices denied a request to delay his prison sentence. The Justice Department is offering airplane manufacturer Boeing a plea deal over 2 deadly crashes involving its 737 MAX jets. Officials are accusing Boeing of violating an agreement that allowed the company to avoid prosecution if it met certain conditions. It initially faced a conspiracy charge over the 2018 and 2019 crashes that killed 346 people. Prosecutors now say Boeing can either plead guilty to that charge or go to trial. An attorney who represents 15 of the crash victims' families told CBS News the proposal was, quote, another sweetheart plea deal for Boeing, and said they strenuously object to it. Turning now to the weather and the first official hurricane of the 2024 season. Hurricane Beryl made landfall Monday on Grenada's Carriacou Island in the Caribbean. The storm quickly developed from a tropical depression to a powerful Category 4 storm over the weekend, something experts say is rare this early in the season. At that strength, winds can max out at 156 miles per hour, and damage could potentially be catastrophic. Here's Tom Hansen.
Hey there, John. Well, Hurricane Beryl is already demonstrating just how ferocious and life-threatening it is. It made landfall in the Windward Islands today as a Category 4, and those videos coming out of the Windward Islands really speak for themselves. So I want to show our viewers what we've been seeing throughout the day. Take a look at this. Out of St. Vincent, roofs just hurling through the air as the Category 4 storm, I should say, blew through the small island. The wind speeds anywhere from 130 to 165 miles per hour, just ripping some buildings to shreds. In the Grenadines, Beryl became the strongest hurricane to pass through the area. That's according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which has been documenting the data all the way back to 1851. Over in Barbados, rough seas from the storm surge knocked boats around, essentially tossing them about like toys. It's an ominous foreshadow for what could be headed our direction. We're currently in Montego Bay, Jamaica, and for now it's business as usual, but the power of this storm is clear. It is definitely a life-threatening event, and while no one is worried here just yet, they are all watching the forecast very closely to see what happens, taking this powerful storm very, very seriously. John?
Tom Hansen in Montego Bay, Jamaica. Thank you. Still to come, illegal border crossings drop to their lowest monthly number since President Biden took office. We'll speak to our Camila Montoya Galvez about what's behind the decline. Plus, how voters and members within President Biden's party are responding to his debate performance against former President Trump last week. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera?
Keep cleaning out of your close-up.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good. Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
That desired farm, it's a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions. Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
The Biden family says the president is committed to continuing as the Democratic Party nominee, despite concern from lawmakers after his first debate and calls from constituents and editorial boards for him to leave the race. CBS News polling after Thursday's CNN debate found that among Democratic voters, 46% said Biden should not run for re-election. That's a 10 percentage point increase from February of this year. Some of their main concerns surrounding the president are his age and mental fitness for the role. By the end of June, 72% of all registered voters said President Biden is lacking in these areas. It represents a 7% increase from voters surveyed at the beginning of June. CBS News chief election and campaign correspondent Robert Costa joins us now from Washington. Bob, it's good to see you. So how does the Biden team assess the damage at this point? Is it just the pundits? Do they think the concern will go away? What's the thinking?
Great to be with you, John. I think about a certain photo on a certain book, LBJ hovering over a table, almost in pain, the hardest job in the world, the American presidency, as you documented in your book, John. And this is a moment that's trying for those close to President Biden, based on my conversations today with many people close to him who were with him over the weekend, family members. And it's evident that this is someone they believe has been on the public stage at a high level since the fall of 1972, when he was elected to the Senate, and then, of course, shortly after, tragically lost his wife and his young daughter. And this is someone who was not willing to just walk away. He was humiliated in 1987 with the plagiarism scandal. He was cast aside by Democrats when he tried to run for president 20 years later. Ultimately landed on the ticket with President Obama, then candidate Obama. But this is someone who has been up and down in the arena. And he is dismissive privately, I'm told, about the press, about what he believes is the political class, and still believes he has a constituency that's with him inside the Democratic Party. We'll see.
Well, I love the reference, and that picture you talk about with LBJ, is about the weight of the office, and it's not just what has happened, but the weight that is on any president for 4 years. And you raise LBJ, and I wonder if you think that either the Trump campaign or Republicans will take advantage of the credibility gap, which is, reminds me of LBJ in the sense of the Biden administration has said he's as sharp as he ever was. He's acute, and when all these stories about his age were raised, now this debate has happened. Do you sense that Republicans are going to be saying it's not just a question of fitness, but it's an administration that isn't shooting straight with the American people?
Some of the Republicans are making that point, but they're relatively muted in doing so, because they look at their own nominee and they see someone who is going to face a criminal sentence in New York on July 11th, and someone who now is boasting about having presidential immunity to at least some extent based on the Supreme Court ruling earlier today. And what's notable in my reporting this afternoon and early evening is that many Democrats feel galvanized by what the Supreme Court did on Monday, and believe it sharpens the case against Trump, and why Democrats, even if they have private or public concerns about President Biden, they don't believe he's fully in command at all times. They believe he's still better than Trump. And that's the dynamic that's so important to note as this all unfolds in real time, this historical moment. Democrats are making a calculation that, yes, there are real concerns about President Biden in some quarters. At the same time, they're alarmed about Trump. They see him as a threat to democracy. And they buy the argument from many Biden people that there is only one person who has ever beaten Trump, and he's running right now and should continue to be the nominee.
And then on the question of what the Biden campaign might do to kind of respond to the perceptions about his first debate performance, is there any plan in terms of that? More public appearances, more interviews, anything that might, or just keep the focus on Donald Trump and his considerable weaknesses?
I'm not sure about more interviews. You never know. We always welcome more interviews in the press, but there's a real distaste for the press inside the White House. Sometimes I'm not stunned's the wrong word, but there's real anger towards the press about how they don't get Biden. They don't understand the president. And so you are going to see what I've been told are more North Carolina moments. On Friday after the debate, you had the president out there in a forceful way on the trail in North Carolina. And you're going to see the Biden campaign try to surround him with a fervent crowd to show some energy, to project that he's in command of the party, in command of his administration.
Robert Costa for us in Washington. Thank you so much, Bob.
Thank you.
Illegal crossings at the U.S.-Mexico border fell to a 3-year low last month. It's the lowest level under the Biden administration. Approximately 84,000 unauthorized migrants were processed in June, the fourth consecutive monthly drop. This is according to preliminary Customs and Border Protection data obtained by CBS News. It's a big shift from December's numbers, which saw nearly 250,000 migrants processed at the southern border. The drop comes weeks after President Biden's executive action restricting asylum claims at the border. CBS News immigration and politics reporter Camilo Montoya Galvez joins us now from Tempe, Arizona. Camilo, can this decline in the crossings be credited to that executive action from the Biden administration, or is it more complex than that?
Well, John, that is certainly what U.S. officials and administration officials, for that matter, are arguing. They are pointing to this dramatic step that President Biden took a few weeks ago at the U.S.-Mexico border to ban most migrants who cross into the country illegally from being able to request and win asylum. And it is important to note, John, that there has been a sustained decrease in illegal border crossings over the past 4 months since March. But that drop has been more acute and pronounced over the past few weeks after President Biden issued that executive action. And so officials would point to the higher rate of that decrease for that attribution to that executive action that the president took at the border. The order, I am told, has significantly reduced, John, the number of migrants who are being released into the U.S. interior with court notices. That historically has been viewed by officials, Republican and Democrat alike, as a pull factor that attracts unauthorized migration because, as you know, once someone is released, John, they typically are able to stay and live in the country and work here for years because of how backlogged the immigration system is, regardless and irrespective of whether or not they actually have valid asylum claims and whether or not their claims will be prevailed and will prevail in court, rather. And so that is very important to note. I will have to underscore, John, however, that there are other factors, as always, at play here that drive migration or that reduce it. Those factors are weather patterns. Temperatures here in the southern U.S. are increasing rapidly, making the trek across the border even more dangerous and potentially deadly. And also, the Mexican government is still staging that aggressive crackdown on U.S.-bound migrants, stopping many of them from reaching the U.S. in the first place.
Camilo, let me grab onto that idea of the pull factor, because it's been debated for so long about immigration. And the idea is basically if you have harsh immigration restrictions, word gets back to those who might think about making the trek, and that if it's harsh enough, it will not pull them. It will push them away. We've talked about this before. Is there a feeling that, in fact, maybe that theory, which was once dismissed out of hand by certainly some liberals, that theory has some weight?
Perhaps, John, but it is still very early to draw any definitive conclusions, I think. It only has been about 4 weeks or 3 weeks since President Biden took this step. And obviously, I think most nonpartisan experts will tell you that migration is driven by both pull and push factor, the push factors being the conditions in countries like Venezuela, China, and other migrant-sending countries that are deteriorating politically and economically, but also the pull factors, not only the releases of migrants into the U.S., but also our labor market, John. That is a pull factor that most people don't talk about. The relatively stable health of the U.S. economy has been attracting many migrants who may not qualify for asylum but are looking for jobs that are available here in the U.S. That also attracts migration. The administration would argue, John, that they are trying to take a balanced approach to this issue, yes, by deterring migrants to at least harsher measures, including the sweeping executive action, but also by allowing them to come here legally if they qualify for these certain programs, including this smartphone app that allows people in Mexico to get an appointment to be processed in a legal and orderly way at official border crossings.
That's very helpful. Final question, Camilo. The legal issues facing this asylum order. What's the status of those, and could this be overturned in the near future?
Well, John, it would not be a major immigration policy if it was not being challenged in federal court. That has been the status quo over the past 20 years since Congress last updated the U.S. immigration system. Every major executive action on this issue by Republican and Democratic presidents alike have been challenged in federal court, and this is no exception. The ACLU and other migrant advocacy organizations are right now in federal court, John, asking a district court judge to strike down this executive action by President Biden, saying that it violates U.S. asylum law and that it places migrants in harm's way. And I do have to say that while this case is pending and ongoing, John, the ACLU was successful in 2018 and 2019 in getting federal courts to strike down a very similar Trump administration regulation.
Camilo Montoya Galvez in Arizona. Thank you, Camilo. 50 years ago, a professor of architecture tried to come up with a way to teach his students about spatial relationships. Hungarian Erno Rubik created a cube of cubes which move along a central axis. He scrambled the colors and then tried to restore them. Wasn't so easy. It was a puzzle. The Rubik's Cube was born. By 1981, the best-selling book of that year was The Simple Solution to Rubik's Cube. And in 1983, there was a Saturday morning cartoon called Rubik, the Amazing Cube. Mathematician Dr. Thomas Rokicki notes that it scrambles into potential combinations of roughly 43 billion, that's 43 followed by 18 zeros. He discovered the absolute minimum amount of moves needed to solve the cube is 20. Earlier this year, the precision was taken out of human hands. A machine developed by Mitsubishi Electric used high-speed motors and AI to set the fastest competition time on a Rubik's Cube by a robot. It solved the puzzle in just 0.3 seconds. France's right flank gains momentum coming up. What the first round of French elections says about the direction of the country and the future of President Macron. You're streaming the Daily Report.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing or bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else.
This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original, 48 Hours, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
You can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to the Daily Report. I'm John Dickerson. Here are some additions to our top stories. Supreme Court conservatives deliver a win to Donald Trump, ruling that the former president does have immunity from prosecution for official actions taken in office. The case revolves around charges Trump faces in D.C. that he tried to overturn his 2020 election loss. The justice's decision sends the issue back to a lower court to determine which actions were official and which weren't, delaying Trump's January 6th related trial. January 6th cheerleader and Trump longtime ally Steve Bannon reported to prison Monday to begin a 4-month sentence. He was found guilty of contempt charges for not complying with a subpoena from the House committee investigating the riots of January 6th. Bannon is attempting to appeal the conviction. His many previous appeals have failed. House Republicans are suing Attorney General Merrick Garland in an effort to obtain audio of President Biden's interview with a special counsel in his classified documents case earlier this year. The special counsel's report found Biden retained sensitive material, but it did not recommend criminal charges. The White House stopped the Justice Department from releasing the audio, citing executive privilege. In response to that move, the Republican-led House voted to hold Garland in contempt of Congress. Exactly 3 weeks ago, French President Emmanuel Macron called for surprise parliamentary elections in France, a direct response to the success of right-wing candidates in the European Parliament election. Macron hoped French voters would reject the far right, and so far that hope has backfired. In the first round of elections over the weekend, the far-right National Rally Party earned the highest tally of votes. A coalition of left-wing groups came in second. Macron's centrist alliance finished third. But there is more voting to come. A second round takes place Sunday. The vast number of seats in Parliament are still up for grabs, and Macron is calling on voters across the political spectrum to prevent a far-right majority in the second round. Let's bring in Max Bergman. He's the director of the Europe, Russia, and Eurasia program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Max, thanks for being with us. What do we mean in this case about, when we're just talking about France, what do we mean when we say far right?
Well, so the far right National Rally Party led by Marine Le Pen is pretty similar, I think, in some ways to the modern U.S. Republican Party in the sense that she is running on anti-immigration platform, very much adheres to many of the things you hear from Donald Trump in terms of economic protectionism, a revived nationalism, so concern about Europe in this sense, wants France to be more independent of the European Union and skeptical of allies, skeptical of NATO, and protectionist in the sense that believing in higher tariffs, in opposing free trade in many respects, and opposing the trade agreements that the EU has done. So the National Rally would, I think, bring in potentially real change. And what is most concerning, I think, to many people in France are particularly the French citizens that are not of white background, that are from Africa, from other regions. And there's no secret of Marine Le Pen and National Rally's sort of disdain for what she sees as sort of in some ways fake French citizens, and wants to get rid of birthright citizenship and other elements of what are really critical to the French state, or at least how France has perceived itself historically.
Is it possible, Max, to know why the Le Pen and that movement is gaining momentum? In other words, is it that racial piece? Is it just anti-Macron sentiment? Is it just the general post-COVID malaise that's bouncing around the world? Do we know?
It's a great question. I think it's all of the above. I think what you have to remember with Emmanuel Macron is that he essentially broke French politics when he won in 2017. That Macron ran as a centrist candidate, created his own party, and traditionally France was a party of really the center left and the center right, and Macron created a party of the center. And when you do that in democratic politics, well, opposition has to come from somewhere, and where it came, at least in the last French presidential elections in 2022, was from the far right in Marine Le Pen and from the far left. And what we're seeing is that Le Pen has gained ground, that has sort of normalized her positions to some degree, has softened on some areas, moved to the center a little bit, but is really winning over actually many sort of far left voters, former communists, for instance, which were quite plentiful in France. And so the problem is the center can't hold, and that's what we saw with this election, is that Macron's party finished third, there wasn't a strong base for it. And so in some ways we're seeing really the revival of a two-party system. The question is, where does the center go? Does the center back the left, or does it back the right? And Macron is trying to get the center to back the left in the second round of voting. And I think that should serve to at least blunt the gains of the far right.
And in the less than a minute we have left, Max, can you give us a sense of what we should read or connect to the rest of what's happening in Europe in terms of the rise of the right? Or would you caution us against over-reading the rise of the right and making grand conclusions about the direction for Europe?
I would caution to some degree. I think what we're seeing is a real anti-incumbency reaction, especially to leaders that have been in power for a long time. And I think you're going to see that also in the UK when they have elections on July 4th. And that's not going to usher in a right-wing government, but a center-left Labour government is likely to return. But then you take a country like Germany, where the German coalition is very unpopular. So I think it's a very mixed picture. And the far right is clearly making gains, but the far right is also shifting and changing to adapt, especially in Europe, to move a bit more to the center. Maybe not fully, but a bit more. And I think it's therefore hard to sort of draw grand conclusions, except for the fact that I think people are generally annoyed post-COVID, and particularly with increasing cost of living in Europe from the energy crisis.
Max Bergman with the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Thank you so much, Max.
Thanks.
This week, Iran will hold a runoff election after no candidate won a majority in the country's presidential race. Saturday's election saw just 40% of the 61 million eligible Iranians vote, a record low. Many people have chosen not to vote to show their disapproval with the government over its handling of things like the economy. The two top candidates are reformist Masoud Pezeshkian and conservative Saeed Jalili. The winner of Friday's runoff will replace Iran's former president, Ibrahim Raisi, who was killed in a helicopter crash in May. Israeli officials are criticizing the decision to release the director of Gaza's main hospital. That doctor was held in Israeli custody for 7 months without being charged. He was apparently allowed to leave to free up space in Israeli prisons. CBS News foreign correspondent MTS Tayeb has more. MTS?
Well, there's absolute fury across the political spectrum here in Israel following the release of the doctor who was in charge of the Al-Shifa hospital, which was once Gaza's main hospital. We have the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu calling for an inquiry. We have the opposition leader Yair Lapid, who is saying that the decision to release this doctor represents what he described as the lawlessness and recklessness of the government. And then you have Itamar Ben-Gvir, who's essentially the interior minister, saying that the decision by the Shin Bet, which is the internal security force, for allowing this release has proven that this force is not fit for purpose, although there's some suggestion that Ben-Gvir has been actively trying to remove the head of Israel's internal service. Whatever the case, it does come as rather at a time in which we've seen Israeli forces have to sort of engage in massive battles with what's been described as a resurgent Hamas. Over the past several days, they've been fighting in an area called Shujaiya, which has resulted in the deaths of at least 2 Israeli soldiers and dozens of Palestinians killed. We've now heard that the Israeli military has leafleted Khan Yunis, which is Gaza's second largest city, telling people to leave the area, and we can only presume that it will be carrying out a major offensive there yet again. But hearing from the doctor from Al-Shifa who has now been released, he described that his time in Israeli jails was, in his words, horrific. He described scenes of torture, he described scenes of abuse, he described scenes of starvation, and all of this tracks with what essentially groups who have been monitoring Israel's prison services have been warning against for months, which again, they say is gargantuan levels of abuse of Palestinians inside of these prisons, but all of that is being eclipsed by the fact that the violence in Gaza is only getting worse. And now this decision by the Israeli military to expand their operations in Khan Yunis, well, one would imagine that the situation there will go from very bad to extremely dire. John.
Imtiaz Tayyab in Tel Aviv. Thank you, Imtiaz. It's a get-out-of-jail-free card with conditions. Ukraine is turning towards its imprisoned population to help boost its numbers in the fight against Russia's invasion. Officials say more than 3,000 prisoners have already been released on parole and given their military assignments. About 27,000 prisoners could be eligible to join the war effort under the new mobilization law. Ukraine has kept its deployment and casualty numbers mostly secret, but has acknowledged the need for more troops as Russia pushes its offensive forward. Over the weekend, Russia's defense ministry says it took control of 2 more villages in the Donetsk region. Tennessee-based retailer Tractor Supply says it will phase out company roles focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. In a statement, the company says going forward it will retire its current DEI goals while still ensuring a respectful environment. Many American companies embraced DEI positions in the wake of George Floyd's death in 2020 to show their commitment to increasing diversity. But those same roles have recently faced pushback from conservative activists. Tractor Supply's announcement comes about a month after a right-wing commentator called for customers to boycott the company. Coming up, American car dealers could lose nearly $1 billion due to an ongoing cyber attack, how the hack is crippling business operations, and what can be done to prevent similar incidents from happening again. You're streaming the Daily Report.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides is your place for fact-based, unbiased reporting.
At the White House, at the Capitol, on the campaign trail.
What do you say to those in your party?
Any cracks in the Republican Party? Our reporters and our anchors travel the country talking to voters like you
about the issues that matter most.
Immigration is really a factor right now
that are going to be driving your decisions.
What would you say to those who say, look, that's just democracy at work?
Listening to you and bringing your voice into our coverage.
I want a strong, proud America.
Is democracy on the ballot in 2024?
Let us help you decide.
America Decides on CBS News 24/7.
Stream our expanded 1-hour program Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
an original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discovery, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable.
The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Nearly 2 weeks after a major cyber attack on a company that provides software services for thousands of car dealers, businesses across the country are still not fully functioning. These companies rely on CDK Global for systems to help run their operations and for inventory and customer relations. But since the ransomware attack on June 19th, some car dealers have had to revert back to doing business the old-fashioned way, with paper and pen. CDK told CBS Money Watch it expects clients to have access to the company's management platform by no later than July 4th. According to analysis from the Anderson Economic Group, it estimates that financial losses from the outage could be at least $944 million as a result of business interruptions over the first 3 weeks. Charles Carmichael joins me now. He's the Chief Technology Officer at Mandiant Consulting, the security consulting organization of Google Cloud. Thank you so much for joining us. So the outage, the CDK cyber outage, is stretching into its third week. Why is it taking so long to get things back up and running?
So it's incredibly common for organizations that deal with enterprise-wide intrusions to need several weeks, perhaps even a month or maybe a few months, to be able to really recover their business operations. So what CDK is dealing with right now is not at all uncommon.
But what takes so long? Are they closing the door, or are they making sure systems are tight? I mean, is there what takes so long?
Generally speaking, it's a combination of a few things. The first thing you have to do is ensure that the threat actor no longer has access to the environment. So there's a tremendous amount of investigative work that has to be performed to figure out how did the threat actor get into the environment, and do they still have access? The second thing organizations need to do is they need to start to recover their systems and their environment so that they can continue to run business operations. And that usually takes a few weeks to do that. And then finally, they need to make sure that the environment is hardened enough so that they can't get easily rehacked by the threat actor or other threat actors that might be interested in conducting business disruption operations and asking for an extortion payment.
Are there any patterns you're seeing in cases like this that this fits into, or is this a new kind of animal?
We see multifaceted extortion operations conducted against organizations in the United States all the time. Mandiant responds to over 1,000 intrusions every year, and many of those intrusions relate to the deployment of ransomware and the ask of an extortion demand from threat actors against victim organizations. We've seen a lot of attacks against healthcare organizations, a number of supply chain organizations, banking organizations, et cetera. Really, threat actors are looking for ways to get paid multi-million-dollar extortion demands by conducting these types of intrusion operations.
And is it because the hackers are getting better at hacking, or are systems getting weaker? Are we just not very good? You know, and I saw there was one case that somebody just didn't have two-factor authentication, which is just laziness.
Yeah, look, there's lots of opportunities for threat actors to break into organizations, and it becomes really difficult for organizations to be able to continuously defend against threat actors. It's a problem that we're going to continue to see, and threat actors are absolutely getting better, but the good news is that we are also getting better from a defensive perspective, and I hope that over time, as we see more actions by law enforcement, that the amount of intrusions will start to decrease a bit over time.
What can businesses do to harden their targets, as it were?
Yeah. You know, focus on the fundamentals. Multi-factor authentication is really important for organizations to defend their networks. engage the good folks to try to break into the network and to try to find vulnerabilities before threat actors have the ability to do that. Patch systems, patch software, that's really critical and important. And assume that organizations may have some level of an intrusion against the organization or against systems, and try to build some additional defensive controls and additional visibility across the environment to stop an attack from becoming very disruptive to an organization.
And Charles, is there an organization, if I'm in a certain kind of business, should I be more concerned than another? And if so, what kinds of businesses are riper targets?
Yeah, so from an extortion perspective, really any organization that makes several $100 million in revenue is a potential target by a multifaceted extortion operator. Because ultimately, these threat actors, they're looking to create enough business disruption and to coerce victims into paying usually 7- or 8-figure extortion demands. So really, these threat actors are incredibly opportunistic. However, we've certainly seen much more targeted attacks against healthcare organizations over the past several months, just because it's known that healthcare organizations will pay extortion demands.
Charles Carmichael, Chief Technology Officer at Mandiant Consulting. Thank you so much, Charles.
Thanks for having me.
These young women are going for the gold next month. From fan favorites to newcomers, we'll introduce you to the group heading to the Paris Olympics to represent Team USA in gymnastics. You're streaming the Daily Report.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy. And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking.
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
Innovative and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
On 1-hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go. With the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes, real lives, real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Haitians are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's gonna be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm gonna remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was gonna be born, he was only gonna live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift, stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
A CBS News investigation. People looking for love, finding their life savings gone.
This could happen to anybody.
And sometimes losing their lives. Anything for love. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
The two NASA astronauts on Boeing's Starliner spacecraft will remain at the International Space Station for a few more weeks. But they are not stuck on the ISS. That's at least according to NASA and Boeing officials. Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams were supposed to return home 9 days after embarking on the trip. Instead, they'll stay in space while Boeing engineers study the faulty thrusters on the spacecraft. An exact return date has yet to be announced. U.S. gymnast Simone Biles is heading to the Olympics for the third time. During Sunday's trials, the 27-year-old posted a two-day point total of 117.2, automatically qualifying her for a spot on the five-woman team. Biles dropped out of multiple finals during the Tokyo Olympics in 2021, citing safety and mental health concerns. Since returning, she has won her sixth world all-around title and her ninth national championship. In Paris, she will compete alongside past Olympians Suni Lee, Jade Carey, and Jordan Childs. Team USA Gymnastics will also welcome 16-year-old Hesley Rivera, who is the youngest American athlete heading to the Games this summer. Here's a look at some of the stories we're covering in our next hour. The Supreme Court hands down a landmark decision on presidential immunity, what it means for former President Trump's current legal troubles, and the wider implications. Plus, illegal crossings at the southern border fell to a new low for the month of June. We'll explain what's driving the decline. And a breach on a software used by thousands of North American car dealerships is showing how supply chains are vulnerable to cyber attacks. We'll take a look at some of the ways to mitigate the issue. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Okay, so let's just start at the beginning.
Well, let me start with this.
What is at stake here?
What is the answer then?
Do you know why?
You want me to just keep going?
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Were there death threats?
How is this possible?
What's wrong with that argument?
Are you saying they lied?
Have you told the government that?
Why won't you say the word crisis?
You're not answering my question.
This really
is that scary?
Does that make